Exactly 1 year ago, I sat down in the middle of the intersection of Karen Hayesod and King David Streets, two of the busiest in Jerusalem, for over 10 minutes without a single car driving by. Yom Kippur in Jerusalem is a sight unlike any other. While the city has a special and subdued quality each Shabbat, the power and meaning of Yom Kippur takes over the whole of Jerusalem Center. As soon as services end on Kol Nidre, people fill the streets and just walk. With no cars on the road, children ride bicycles and scooters, young couples stride along hand in hand, families greet one another in the street, dogs search for scraps of food, and everyone just seems at peace. In a city that so often is defined by our divisions, our differences, and our pains, the night of Yom Kippur is the opposite. Everyone dressed in white, walking slowly, focusing on the meaning of the holiday instead of the other distractions that can make Jerusalem such a challenging place to live. That night, there is a genuine excitement and lightness in the streets. The idea of Yom Kippur as the white fast feels very true, even though we were in the midst of a holiday when we most critically and deeply evaluate our own actions and humbly ask forgiveness from God, one another, and ourselves. This is not a simple task, but the heaviness is not present in the public expression of this holiday. There is a sense of Yom Kippur really being a new beginning and a true opening of the new year with all its optimism and opportunities. I can still remember this image, this feeling with intense clarity. Whenever I was confronted by one of the many tensions I felt so palpably while living in Jerusalem, I tried to remember it at its calmest, while I sat in the middle of the street. When the divisions between Orthodox and secular, rich and poor, child and elder seemed to melt away, and we were all just people observing a holiday in one of the world's holiest cities. Even on that night, we acknowledged that entire populations of the city, the Arab population, the Christian population, even much of the secular Jewish population, were largely hidden. Not out of fear, but rather out of respect. Yair Lapid, Israel's finance minister and one of its rising government stars, famously gave a speech in which he referenced the Yom Kippur law. He shared with a room of very traditional Orthodox men that this law, the idea that no one drives in Jerusalem on Yom Kippur, and even the most mixed neighborhoods of the city are very quiet and peaceful, is actually one of the most followed because it doesn't exist at all. No one forced the non-religious population to, in a sense, observe Yom Kippur, but they do just that, because this is how communities support one another. Though unfortunately, Yom Kippur is just one day. The other 364 days of the year, Jerusalem rarely feels so unified and connected. The secular-religious divide presented one of the main tensions I struggled with while living in Israel. It was challenging to feel like I lived somewhere in the middle, with a foot in each world, because the divide is that wide. These tensions are in the minds of so many. Some live their lives with their eyes directed towards God and God alone. They focus on that relationship, the connection between themselves and God. For them, their life is all about doing God's work. They feel called, and their goals are singularly focused to achieve these goals, so focused that they often put blinders on who or what they may need to push aside to achieve them. As I encountered many of these individuals over my year living and learning in Jerusalem, their focus and determination was admirable. But at what cost was this single-mindedness to the Israel us pluralistic and liberal Jews dream of? Her name was Shifra Blass. She looked exactly like every Jewish grandmother I've ever known and was unassuming, kind, and polite. She spoke to us about her family, her home, her Barnard education, and about how she fell in love on a study abroad program and decided to move to Israel. For about the first 30 minutes of her talk, she had me. As a young wife and mother, she followed her husband to a new housing development that happened to be in the West Bank. She wanted to find a real home and community in Israel for her and her new family. But once she began to describe her vision for greater Israel and refused to discuss how the settlements displaced thousands of Palestinians from their land on the Israeli government's dime, we were no longer having a conversation. Shifra does not have hate in her heart. She just believes she is right. She believes that the land of Israel belongs to the Jews from sea to sea and has dedicated her life to working towards this goal. It's not that she does not acknowledge the other. She simply feels a call from God to ensure and expand the Jewish state in the land of Israel. But in doing so, she necessarily leaves out a whole swath of the population, stepping over them clumsily in order to achieve this dream. And I had the same challenge with Bracha and Yehoshua Weinberger, who lovingly invited me and many of my classmates into their home in Givat Zev, a settlement just outside of central Jerusalem. For this Hasidic family, Torah is everything. Every question, argument, concern, and doubt can be answered and smoothed over through Torah and its commentaries. When we directly asked Yehoshua if he were able to answer "I don't know" to a question, he answered without hesitation, "No." To him, all of life's guidance and solutions can be found within Jewish holy text, and his years of study make this information readily accessible in his mind. Moreover, all decisions and choices, regardless of importance, must be based on Torah text or commentary. Thus, Weinberger believes all his actions are a direct reflection of God's message and words. When compared this absolute faith and observance of each and every letter of the law, the Weinbergers simply could not comprehend Reform Judaism's more interpretive and self-selecting halachic perspective. While they were incredibly hospitable and kind to me and my classmates, we sensed that they felt we were not really Jewish enough, or really Jewish at all. They kept on saying we didn't know enough yet, we weren't done with our journey yet, and the implication was that once we found orthodoxy, we would be at our destination. This family and others in their community are also very confident in their lifestyle and their beliefs. They are fully at peace with their God and feel they are doing God's work. I admire this commitment and am honestly somewhat envious of their assuredness they have in their practice and beliefs. They know where to look and whom to ask when they have a conflict or a crisis. But when they deny that my existence is good enough and fault my observance, they ignore and minimize the importance of one of our key midot, our key values, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. We believe in supporting our fellow Jews, of caring about their needs, instead of tearing them down. I respect their interpretation of Judaism, so why can't they at least accept mine? And I felt this tension again when I first attempted to pray at the Kotel with Women of the Wall. This group of women pray each month on Rosh Chodesh in the women's section. The Kotel is run by an ultra-Orthodox rabbi and largely feels like an outdoor Orthodox shul much of the time. But once a month, very, very early in the morning, a group of diverse women come together to break this monopoly. Last summer, as we tried to pray, we were met with increased hostility and violence from the ultra-religious men and women who came to protest our prayers. Eggs, chairs, and slurs rained down on us with such intense vitriol as we tried to sing about peace and holiness. I could barely pray. Like Shifra and the Weinbergers, these protesters also felt they were doing God's will. They follow Jewish laws that decree that women should not pray out loud and cannot wear talit and tefillin. They were filled with confidence and righteous indignation. For them, protest was the only way to stop this heresy at their holy site. God's will or not, though, these people acted against other people. Their words hurt. Their egg hit a pregnant woman. But we were not deterred, and every month I would return to pray with this group. Sometimes the jeers of the protesters were louder. Sometimes our prayers overtook the space. The struggle continues to this day. Schiffer blasts the Weinbergers and the Kotel protesters believe their actions are sanctified by God's commandments. I would argue that within their insular worlds, they are righteous and ultimately good people. They truly believe that what they are doing is what God desires of them. But on Yom Kippur, however, we learn and exclaim, this is not enough. Our liturgy reminds us it is not enough to live our lives between ourselves and God. We must take account for and atone for our actions and the sins we have committed between ourselves and others. Throughout the high holidays, and especially today on Yom Kippur, we repeat the phrase, for the sins between people and God, the Day of Atonement atones. But for the sins between one person and another, the Day of Atonement does not atone until they have made peace with one another. On this day, our day of ultimate judgment and confession, we acknowledge that the most challenging level of atonement is between us and our fellow human beings. It is so challenging we get extra time to achieve it. We are charged to use this 10-day period to make amends, to reach out to one another, acknowledge one another, and offer that difficult apology, to really look within ourselves and see how we wronged one another and resolve to do better. We have to be humble and ask for forgiveness. It isn't easy, but is our only hope for growth. And the Israel that we dream about, that I dream about, will not come from the radicals who look to heaven instead of the people in front of them. It will not come from the settler movement, and it will not come from those in Gaza who built tunnels underneath living rooms and fired 700 rockets into Sderot in one day. This week's Torah portion teaches us, Lo bashamayim hi, it is not in heaven. It will not come from those who are using heaven as their justification for their actions. It will not come from those who settle on confiscated land, people who denigrate the beauty of pluralistic Judaism, or those who defend a status quo that does not allow for free expression of Jewish prayer and belief. Moses taught us this. Moses taught us that our focus needs to be here on earth with one another. Living a righteous life with a narrow definition of righteousness while harming others does not, I believe, merit full atonement on Yom Kippur. And many Israelis know this too. We see glimpses of hope even in the darkest times. After the truly horrific murder of a Palestinian teen to avenge the death of the 3 Israeli teenagers killed this summer, one of the strongest voices in protest came from Yishai Frankel, the father of one of these murdered teenagers. He issued a statement saying, "Murder is murder. Whatever the nationality and age are, there are no justifications, no forgiveness, no penance for any murder." There were busloads of Israelis from all across the political spectrum who visited the Abu Qadir family's mourning tent, essentially the Muslim equivalent of a Shiva call. By all accounts, these visits were tense but appreciated. People in pain were reaching out to each other on a human level. And many others in Israel are working against the efforts of those who call for the destruction of the enemy, to offer an alternative to these extreme voices. The YMCA in Jerusalem offers a trilingual preschool and brings together children from all backgrounds to learn and grow together. I pray that these toddlers will grow up to learning to see the other as friends and not enemies across a battlefield. Doctors in the Israeli hospitals next to Gaza risked their lives to save and protect all the injured. Neighbors opened their doors of their homes to one another on their respective holidays and celebrated together. People to people. This is where, slowly and surely, change is possible. So what does this mean for us? What does it mean for us who live so very far away from Israel? We need to remember that our voices are important in these conversations. We can help keep the focus on human interaction, bringing God into the everyday concerns of Israelis who need our support and our concern. I believe they need non-Orthodox options for vibrant Jewish expression. And essentially, they need us. They need us because Reform Judaism is growing in Israel, but is still finding its footing and its place. So it is up to us to make sure that our voices are heard and that our focus remains grounded instead of up towards heaven, because it is far too easy to forget our fellow human being in that relationship. We know that change happens on the ground and that a positive and just Israel will grow from the hopeful voices and those who can still envision peace and community that includes all peoples. So raise up your voice in support or in protest. The opinion of American Jewry is important to Israelis. If you believe strongly about the conflict or the prospect of peace, say something. If you have an opinion about non-Orthodox forms of religious expression, say something. If you believe in a woman's right to pray in public, say something. And if you have opinions about economic and social inequality, massive problems that are facing the state of Israel, say something. Israel is a young country. It benefits from a multiplicity of voices, especially those hopeful and idealistic ones that see Israel for what it can be. It benefits from any voice that forces it to re-examine any status quo. And we take these lessons and apply them here because the challenges to what we hold dear aren't just happening far away, but right here in our own backyard. When Chabad moved into Castro Valley, they ran an advertisement that said, "The Jews are returning to Castro Valley after 50 years. You all laughed at that announcement because you know it's not true. Many of you have been sitting here for decades, fighting and working and believing in Jewish community. It is up to us then to make that voice heard. Your voice as a Reformed Jew matters in Castro Valley as much as your voice as an American Jew matters in Israel. The volume from the extreme positions in Israel can be off-putting, but moderates exist and benefit from our support. Let us stand with those who decry reckless extremism. My teacher and Jewish scholar, Rabbi Rachel Adler, taught me this. One way you can be strong is to be hopeful and not despairing. As Joshua told the people as they entered the land of Israel, Chazak ve'emetz, be strong and resolute. But one way to be strong is to always hold on to hope. That's our response as we entered the land, that it takes more courage often to hold on to hope and not despair into fatalism. We can bring this excitement and support of Israel and our vision for it and make sure our voice is heard. When my parents came to visit me in Israel, we had one of those what can be moments. They had experienced Rosh Chodesh with Women of the Wall just a few days before, where my dad stood behind the partition and my mom and I prayed with the group of women. But on that day, at the egalitarian section of the Kotel, we stood together for the first time. Down some stairs and around the corner, a new section of the Kotel has been established. Yes, it is currently very quiet and underutilized, but they are the same stones that stood around the same temple. We approached the wall together, one hand reaching for the stones and one holding each other close. And we prayed. My mom, my dad, and myself touched the stones and prayed together as a family at the Kotel. Israel's national anthem is called Hatikva, which means the hope. So we hope for an Israel that values all Jewish perspectives, voices, and beliefs. An Israel that lives up to the dream that our ancestors clawed and scraped and envisioned for 2,000 years. We must preserve hope and a vision for the future even when Israelis are focused on the tough, pragmatic realities. Even when there are pressures to divide us and work against one another, may this hope, this dream, ground us and remind us that even though we may have different paths and means to get there, we need each other to be a whole people, and we cannot thrive without being a whole people. May 5775 finally be that year that brings us closer to a pluralistic, peaceful Israel. Can you hear Ratzon? May it be God's will. Amen.